A civilization's fate once depended on a metal they could not find. For over 2,000 years, the world ran on bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Copper was common, found in hills and mountains across the ancient lands. But tin was something else entirely. It was astonishingly rare, hidden in only a few far-flung corners of the earth. This simple geological fact created a desperate puzzle for every king, merchant, and smith from the palaces of Greece to the rivers of Mesopotamia. How do you build an age when its most vital ingredient is missing? By the end of this investigation, you will understand how the hunt for this one metal forged history's first global network, connecting continents in a web of trade and intrigue. We will follow the ghostly trails of ships carrying strange cargo and trace the overland routes where amber moved south and tin moved north. We will see how entire empires rose by mastering this supply chain and how they crumbled when it was severed. What does it say about us that our greatest endeavors so often hinge on the scarcest of things? That alloy was called bronze? To understand why it was worth crossing the known world, you have to grasp its profound superiority. Pure copper is a soft, malleable metal, beautiful for ornaments but disappointing for an axe blade or a sword. It bends, it dulls, it fails under stress. But add just a small, almost magical proportion of tin, and everything changes. The mixture transforms into something entirely new, a metal that is harder, sharper, and far more durable. This is the alchemy that defined an age. A typical bronze might be made from about 9 parts copper to just 1 part tin. That single part, that 10%, was the difference between a ceremonial trinket and the spear that could defend a city, the plow that could turn tough soil, and the chisel that could carve history into stone. Tin acted as a powerful strengthener, allowing the alloy to hold a lethal edge and resist the shocks of combat or labor. The resulting bronze was not only stronger but also more fluid when melted, making it easier for ancient smiths to cast into intricate shapes, from delicate jewelry to monumental statues. So while copper provided the body, tin provided the spirit, the essential spark that turned a common metal into the backbone of civilization. And herein lies the core of our mystery. Copper ores are scattered generously across the globe, from Cyprus to the Alps to the British Isles. But workable tin deposits are geological rarities, concentrated in only a handful of remote locations. This imbalance created a world where the many needed the few, setting the stage for a trade network of staggering scale and complexity. This scarcity was not a minor inconvenience, it was a geographical trap. Picture the ancient world at the height of the Bronze Age, around 3,500 years ago. If you were a king in the sun-baked city of Mycenaean or a merchant in bustling Babylon, your entire society depended on a steady flow of tin. Yet if you sent your scouts to search the nearby hills and riverbeds, they would return empty-handed. There was simply none to be found in your lands. The known workable sources of tin were shockingly few and impossibly far away. To the distant northwest, on the stormy, mist-shrouded island the Romans would later call Britannia, lay the rich veins of Cornwall. Far to the north and east, in the dense forests of what is now Germany and the Czech Republic, the Erzgebirge mountains held another crucial deposit. And whispers on the trade winds spoke of even more remote sources, perhaps deep in the rugged highlands of Central Asia, in places like modern Afghanistan. Now look at the map of the bronze-using civilizations. They form a brilliant crescent of power and innovation around the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. The labyrinthine palaces of Minoan Crete, the fortified citadels of Mycenaean Greece, the mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia, and the ancient, river-fed kingdoms of Mesopotamia. These were the engines of the age, the consumers of bronze, and they were separated from the sources of its key ingredient by a staggering void. The distance from Mesopotamia to Cornwall is over 3,000 miles. That is a journey across open seas, over mountain passes, through territories of unknown peoples, a trek that could take the better part of a year. This was the fundamental problem of the Bronze Age. The demand was concentrated in one place, and the supply was locked away in another, with a continent in between. Every sword, every ceremonial vessel, every tool of statecraft began with this impossible logistics puzzle. How do you connect these dots across a wild and unmapped world? The answer would become one of humanity's first great exercises in globalization. The solution to this vast geographical puzzle began not with ships, but with words pressed into clay. Our earliest clear window into the tin trade comes from the ancient city of Mari, a bustling hub on the Euphrates River. Here, in royal archives, thousands of cuneiform tablets detail the meticulous administration of a kingdom, and among lists of grain, livestock, and textiles, we find repeated, urgent references to a precious commodity. The tablets speak of tin arriving from far to the east, a place described vaguely as from beyond the mountains. This was not a local resource, but an import, carefully weighed, taxed, and stored in palace treasuries because its value was second only to silver. These texts give us names and numbers, recording shipments measured in small, precious ingots, sometimes just enough to outfit a single chariot with bronze fittings. They tell us the trade was organized, state-controlled, and absolutely vital, but they also present us with our first historical mystery. Where exactly was this eastern tin coming from? The mountains could refer to the Zagros Range, separating Mesopotamia from the Iranian plateau, but the source lay even further beyond, a secret held closely by the merchants who braved the journey. To move this critical metal from those mysterious eastern sources to the workshops of Mesopotamia, a remarkable commercial system evolved. The key players were Assyrian merchants from the city of Ashur. They established a network of trading colonies known as karum in the heart of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The most famous of these was at Kanish. Think of these not as simple market stalls, but as fortified, semi-autonomous commercial districts. Assyrian merchants lived there under their own laws, maintaining intricate records on clay tablets that detailed loans, partnerships, and contracts. Their caravans of donkeys, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, would make the perilous 6-week journey from Ashur, carrying tin and luxurious Babylonian textiles. In Anatolia, they traded these for the one resource the land-rich region had in abundance, silver, and also for gold. This was not haphazard barter, it was high finance on a Bronze Age scale. The tin that fueled Anatolia's own bronze industry often arrived via this two-step process, from an unknown eastern source to Mesopotamia, and then northward via these Assyrian middlemen. The system was so efficient and so profitable that it turned Ashur from a modest city-state into a commercial superpower, its wealth built on connecting supply with desperate demand. Yet for all their meticulous record-keeping, the Assyrian merchants guarded their ultimate suppliers like a state secret. The phrase, tin from beyond the mountains, persists, a frustratingly vague clue. Scholars have long debated the possible sources. Could it have come from the distant, mineral-rich lands of Central Asia, perhaps modern-day Uzbekistan or even Afghanistan, where ancient tin mines have been identified? Or were there closer, now exhausted deposits in western Iran that supplied this early trade? The cuneiform texts are silent on the precise origin, telling us everything about the economics and nothing about the geology. This silence itself is telling. It suggests the trade route was long, fragile, and passed through many hands, with each link in the chain perhaps knowing only the immediate step before and after. The Mesopotamians knew their tin came from the east, but the lands of its origin remained a legend, a rumor at the end of a very long and dangerous road. This uncertainty sets the stage for an even greater leap, one that would eventually bypass these overland trails entirely and turn the Mediterranean itself into a highway for tin. While the Assyrians mastered the overland caravan, a different kind of power was rising in the wine-dark sea. On the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization built a society not on vast armies but on the decks of ships. Their palaces, like the magnificent complex at Knossos, were unfortified, a stunning fact that speaks volumes. Their security and their wealth came not from walls but from waves. They were the supreme mariners of their time, and their role in the tin trade remains one of the most intriguing puzzles of the era. Did they simply act as distributors, or did their ships venture to the very ends of the earth to find the source? Archaeology at their ports, like Kamos on Crete's southern shore, reveals a world connected. We find pottery from Egypt, from Cyprus, from the Levantine coast, and from the Greek mainland. These were not just souvenirs, they were the containers of their day, holding oil, wine, and other goods. The presence of such a wide array of foreign materials tells us the Minoans were at the center of a vibrant maritime exchange network. Their sleek, oared ships, depicted in vibrant frescoes, were the couriers of the Bronze Age Mediterranean. It is almost certain that tin, arriving overland from the east to ports in the Levant like Ugarit, would have been transferred onto Minoan vessels. From there, these expert sailors could have distributed it throughout the Aegean, to the rising powers on the Greek mainland, and to their own prolific workshops on Crete. This intermediary role alone would have granted them immense influence and wealth, but some scholars look at the map and ask a more daring question: could the Minoans have gone further? Their seafaring technology was advanced enough for open water voyages beyond the sight of land. We know they had established a presence on the Aegean islands, on Cyprus, and along the Anatolian coast. What if their exploration stretched westward into the central Mediterranean? There is tantalizing, though debated, evidence of very early Minoan contact with the metal-rich islands of Sardinia and Sicily, and even with the distant shores of Iberia, modern-day Spain and Portugal. The Iberian Peninsula is known to have had tin deposits, particularly in the northwest. If Minoan ships, even occasionally, made the arduous journey through the Strait of Gibraltar and up the Atlantic coast, they could have accessed a western source completely independent of the long, politically fraught overland routes from the east. This is not a settled fact but a compelling hypothesis. A single such direct connection would have been a geopolitical game-changer. It would mean the Minoans weren't just middlemen in an eastern supply chain, they were masters of an alternative one. They could have controlled the flow of a second stream of tin into the Mediterranean, a stream that bypassed the Assyrian merchants and the kingdoms of the Near East entirely. This possibility adds a profound layer of strategy to our understanding of their thalassocracy, their sea empire. Their power may have been built not just on moving goods, but on knowing secrets, on finding paths others thought were myth. The quiet, unfortified palaces of Crete suddenly seem less like peaceful retreats and more like the confident headquarters of a network that held the literal recipe for Bronze Age power in its hold. Whether as brilliant distributors or as intrepid explorers who found a back door to the tin fields of the West, their command of the sea made them indispensable architects of this first global age. And as their influence eventually waned, a new, fiercer power from the Greek mainland would rise, looking to seize control of these vital sea lanes for themselves. The Minoan thalassocracy did not last forever. By the middle of the second millennium before the Common Era, a new, more warlike power had risen to dominance in the Aegean. From their fortified citadels on the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans looked out with an ambition forged in bronze. They did not just admire Minoan sea power, they sought to seize it for themselves and with it, control over the lifeblood of their age. At sites like Mycenae, Turin, and Pylos, archaeologists have found the physical evidence of this obsession, not just in the hoards of bronze weapons, but in the very paperwork of empire. The key to understanding their system lies in a script called Linear B, the earliest written form of Greek, deciphered in the 1950s. These are not epic poems or royal decrees, but palace inventories, bureaucratic records pressed into clay tablets that were never meant to last, only to be recycled after a year or so. It is by pure accident of fire, which baked and preserved them, that we have this direct line into the Mycenaean mind. And what these tablets reveal is a society where bronze was not merely a commodity, but a currency of power, tracked with the precision of a modern military ledger. At the Palace of Pylos, tablets meticulously record the allocation of bronze to individual smiths. One entry might note that a certain craftsman named Kori-Andros received an amount of bronze, measured in units of weight, for the purpose of manufacturing spearheads. Another tablet tracks the disbursement of metal to workshops for the production of chariot fittings or swords. This was a command economy centered on the palace. The Wanax, the Mycenaean king, did not simply rule by divine right. He ruled by controlling the means of production for the very material that defined his era. Every ingot of bronze, and by extension every ounce of the precious tin within it, was state property. Its journey from a distant mine to a palace storeroom, and finally into the hands of a sanctioned smith, was the central circulatory system of the kingdom. The palace provided the raw material, the smiths provided their skilled labor, and the finished weapons and tools returned to the palace to be distributed to the military, the administration, or sent as diplomatic gifts. This system made the acquisition of tin a matter of the highest state security. A disruption in the supply chain was not an economic inconvenience, it was an existential threat. Without a steady flow of tin, the smiths would fall idle, the armories would empty, and the Wanax's power, built on the gleaming edge of bronze, would literally dull and crumble. The Linear B tablets show us a civilization that understood this fragility completely. They managed their bronze with a nervous, meticulous care, because they knew their world was connected by threads stretched taut across mountains and seas, threads that could snap with a single storm, a rebellion in a far-off land, or the rise of a rival who controlled the source. But how do we move from ledgers and palace inventories to the tangible reality of the trade itself? For that, we must dive into the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean, off the rugged coast of southern Turkey. Here, in the late 1980s, a sponge diver named Mehmet Sakir surfaced with a story that would rewrite our understanding of the Bronze Age. He had seen strange metal biscuits on the seafloor, lying amidst the ghostly timbers of an ancient ship. This was the Uluburun shipwreck, a time capsule preserved in the silt for over 3,300 years, and it is arguably the single most important archaeological discovery for understanding the true scale and sophistication of this global network. The cargo of this vessel reads like a manifest for an entire civilization. The hull was packed with raw materials from across the known world. There were 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, shaped like stretched oxhides for easy transport. But resting right beside them were over a ton of pure tin ingots, the other half of the bronze recipe, delivered together in one astonishing shipment. This was not a theoretical trade route, it was a physical snapshot of the supply chain in motion. But the ship carried more than just metal. It was a floating emporium of Bronze Age luxury and necessity. There were logs of precious ebony wood from Africa, chunks of raw glass from Mesopotamia in vibrant cobalt blue and amber hues, jars filled with terebinth resin possibly used for incense or perfume, elephant tusks, ostrich eggshells, and even a gold scarab inscribed with the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. This was not a simple tramp steamer carrying one commodity. It was a bulk carrier for kings, a direct link between the raw material producers and the palace workshops that consumed them. By analyzing the cargo and the personal items of the crew, archaeologists have pieced together a likely voyage of epic scope, the ship probably began its journey somewhere in the Levant, perhaps a port like Ugarit. It likely sailed to Cyprus to take on its massive copper load, then perhaps eastward to pick up the Mesopotamian glass and other goods. The tin's origin is debated, but its presence suggests a link to either the eastern sources overland to the Levant or, tantalizingly, from a western source reached via the Mediterranean. The ship was then heading west, likely aiming for the Aegean and the Mycenaean palaces, when it foundered off Uluburun's sharp promontory. The crew itself was multinational. Seals and personal items found on board point to men from Mycenaean Greece, Cyprus, Canaan, and possibly Egypt. This was a microcosm of the Bronze Age world, a cooperative venture where expertise and contacts mattered more than nationality, all united by the common goal of moving unimaginable wealth across the sea. The sheer value of the Uluburun's cargo is almost incalculable. The tin alone, at 10% of the copper volume, represented a fortune, but combined with the copper, it had the potential to make 11 tons of bronze, enough to outfit a small army with weapons, armor, and tools. This one shipwreck reveals the breathtaking complexity and integration of Bronze Age commerce. It shows us that the kings and merchants were not just trading finished goods, they were orchestrating the movement of raw ingredients on an industrial scale, across political and cultural boundaries, with a logistical precision we once thought impossible for the era. The Uluburun was not an anomaly. It was likely one of many such vessels, the unsung container ships of the ancient world, whose safe passage meant the difference between an age of bronze and an age of stone. While the Uluburun ship epitomized the maritime network, another equally vital web was being spun across the continent, far from the Mediterranean sun. Deep in the forests and river valleys of Central Europe, a different kind of treasure was moving south, one that would become inextricably linked to the hunt for tin. This was the Amber Road, a prehistoric highway of commerce that connected the foggy shores of the Baltic Sea to the dazzling civilizations of the south. For millennia, the warm, golden resin of fossilized amber washed up on Baltic coasts was coveted as a magical substance, capturing the sun's light within it. But this route was never just about jewelry. It was a two-way street for ambition, and along its path flowed the other critical ingredient of the age. The geography makes the connection almost inevitable. In the Erzgebirge Mountains, straddling modern Germany and the Czech Republic, lay one of the few significant tin deposits in all of Europe. If you were a trader with access to this precious metal, how would you get it to the wealthy kingdoms who desperately needed it? The most logical path was south, following the river systems like the Elbe and the Danube, corridors that eventually led to the Alps and the northern frontiers of the Mediterranean world. It is highly likely that ingots of tin from these Central European mines began traveling this same amber road, not on grand ships, but in ox-drawn carts and on the backs of traders. The amber itself acted as a kind of prehistoric currency, a high-value, low-bulk commodity that could be carried north to south with relative ease. In the bustling trading hubs along the route, this beautiful resin could be exchanged for what the northern cultures needed, including, crucially, copper from the Alps or from further south, and the finished luxury goods of the Mediterranean. But more importantly, the established trust and pathways of the amber trade would have provided the perfect infrastructure to move something far more strategically sensitive, tin, in the opposite direction. This was not a state-run enterprise like the Mycenaean palace system, but a chain of hand-to-hand exchanges where goods might change ownership many times over hundreds of miles. Orchestrating much of this early exchange was a remarkable and often overlooked culture known as the Únětice people, who thrived in the region of modern Czechia, Poland, and Germany right at the heart of this resource zone. They were not merely passive dwellers on top of tin deposits, they were sophisticated metallurgists and traders. Archaeological finds in Únětice territory include not only raw tin ingots, but also finished bronze objects like distinctive crescent-shaped necklaces and finely crafted daggers. This tells us they were not just digging up ore, they were processing it, alloying it with copper, and creating valuable finished products for trade. They became the essential middlemen, the processors who transformed raw geological luck into a tradable commodity. By controlling the initial production, they could feed both the local demand and the long-distance trade networks stretching south. The Amber Road, therefore, was more than a path for a single gemstone. It was the central nervous system of a continental exchange, where the golden amber of the north flowed south to adorn the necks of princes, and in return, the knowledge of bronze and the vital tin to make it crept northward, weaving the disparate tribes of Europe into the broader tapestry of the Bronze Age world. This overland network was the silent, steady counterpart to the dramatic sea voyages, proving that the need to connect supply and demand could forge roads across entire landscapes. Yet for all the meticulous records of the Assyrian merchants, the ultimate origin of their tin remained a closely guarded secret. The phrase "from beyond the mountains" was a tantalizing clue, pointing eastward into a geographical and historical haze. To solve this, we must follow the clues left not in clay, but in stone, traveling far beyond the world of the Mycenaean palaces and the Mediterranean sea lanes to the rugged, high-altitude landscapes of Central Asia. Here lies a compelling and increasingly supported theory, one that stretches the Bronze Age world map to its absolute limits. The hypothesis suggests that a critical, perhaps the original, source for Mesopotamian tin lay thousands of miles to the east, in what are now modern Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. The geological evidence is striking. In the forbidding mountains of the Afghan region of Badakhshan and in neighboring areas of Uzbekistan, archaeologists have identified ancient tin mines. These are not minor scratchings on the surface, but extensive underground workings, with shafts and galleries following rich veins of cassiterite, the principal ore of tin. Crucially, the waste material left at these sites, the slag and debris from primitive smelting, has been scientifically dated. The results point to active, large-scale mining operations occurring precisely during the height of the Mesopotamian Bronze Age, from around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. This is not a coincidence of timing. It is a direct material link between a remote source and the era of desperate demand, but acknowledging the source is only the first step. The true scale of the achievement lies in the journey. Picture the immense distance involved. From the mines of Badakhshan to the trading hubs of Mesopotamia is a trek of well over 1,500 miles as the crow flies. For ancient caravans, the reality was far longer and more arduous. This was not a single, continuous highway. It was a chain of segments, a relay race across some of the most challenging terrain on the planet. Caravans of donkeys and later Bactrian camels uniquely suited to the cold deserts would have carried heavy ingots of tin westwards. Their path would have wound through the high passes of the Hindu Kush, across the stark plateau of the Iranian desert, and down through the mountain valleys of the Zagros range before finally descending to the river plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. Each leg of this journey presented its own existential challenges. There were natural barriers, from scorching deserts with no water to frozen mountain passes only open in summer. Then there were human factors. The route passed through the territories of numerous different cultures, tribes, and early city-states. Safe passage would have required intricate diplomacy, established treaties, and likely the payment of tolls or taxes at every major stopping point. This was a supply chain built not on conquest, but on fragile, constantly negotiated mutual interest. A local conflict, a shift in tribal alliances, or a bad season could sever the route for years. The tin that reached Mari or Asher was not just a metal, it was the survivor of an epic continental odyssey, its final cost reflecting every hardship and agreement along the way. This Afghan hypothesis fundamentally expands our understanding of the Bronze Age world. It means that the gleaming bronze statue in a Sumerian temple or the sharpened spear in a Hittite king's armory could very well have begun as raw ore in a Central Asian mountain, mined by workers whose names and language are lost to us, then passed from hand to hand, caravan to caravan, across a vast human network that connected worlds unknown to each other. It transforms the map from a collection of isolated civilizations into a single, breathing organism, with veins of trade stretching from the Atlantic fringes of Europe to the very heart of Asia. The scarcity of tin did not just create trade, it forced humanity to weave its first truly global web, proving that necessity and the pursuit of a crucial alloy could bridge continents millennia before we ever called it globalization. While the eastern route stretched to the mountains of Central Asia, another source of tin lay in the opposite direction, at the very edge of the known world. On the southwestern tip of the island of Britain, the rugged peninsula of Cornwall sits atop one of the richest tin fields in all of Europe. Here, the granite bones of the land are laced with veins of cassiterite, the tin ore that would have glittered in streams and outcrops, visible even to prehistoric people. The evidence for ancient exploitation is etched into the landscape itself. At sites like the famous Kestrel mine in neighboring Devon and in the streaming channels of Cornwall, archaeologists find stone hammers and primitive tools used to crush ore, alongside waste piles that have been dated back over 4,000 years. This was not casual gathering, it was organized extraction, happening contemporaneously with the great palaces of the Mediterranean. But with such abundance in a land so remote from the centers of Bronze Age power, a pressing question emerges. How did this Cornish tin reach the world that needed it? The answer may lie not on land, but in the treacherous, grey waters of the Atlantic Ocean. A controversial yet increasingly plausible theory suggests the existence of an Atlantic Bronze Age, a maritime highway running along the western coasts of Europe. Imagine the journey. Tin ingots mined and smelted in Cornwall could be loaded onto stout, hide-covered boats. From there, a cautious coastal voyage, always keeping land in sight, would navigate the Celtic Sea. The first major stop would likely be the peninsula of Brittany, in modern-day France, where communities shared cultural and trade links with Cornwall. From Brittany, the next logical hop was south, down the long coast of Gaul to the distant, resource-rich shores of Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal. This Atlantic route was not for the faint of heart. It meant contending with powerful tides, unpredictable storms, and the sheer psychological weight of sailing into the great ocean, but the potential reward was immense. For in southern Iberia, a legendary culture known as Tartessos flourished, a civilization described by later Greek writers as fabulously wealthy in metal. The Tartessians acted as the critical intermediaries, the gatekeepers between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. They likely received tin and also gold and copper from their own lands and from the north, and funneled it eastward through the Strait of Gibraltar. Once inside the Mediterranean, this western tin could enter the existing distribution networks, reaching the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, and beyond. This theory transforms our map of the Bronze Age from a primarily east-west axis to a giant, interconnected circle. It proposes that tin from Cornwall could have traveled south and east, eventually meeting copper from Cyprus in a Mycenaean workshop, having completed a half-circuit of the continent. The implications are profound. It means the Bronze Age world had not one, but multiple, redundant supply lines for its most critical material. If conflict or drought shut down the overland routes from the east, a trickle of metal might still arrive from the distant, misty west, a lifeline across the ocean. The very existence of such a route speaks to the relentless, innovative drive of ancient traders, who turned the fearful Atlantic frontier into just another commercial corridor, all for the gleam of a metal that could shape the destiny of empires. But every journey needs a destination, and every recipe needs its base ingredient. For all the epic quests to secure rare tin, the bronze of the Mediterranean world would have been impossible without a steady, massive supply of its other half. This brings us to the island of copper, a place so central to the age that its very name became synonymous with the metal itself. In the diplomatic letters exchanged between the great kings of the late Bronze Age, found in archives from Egypt to Anatolia, one kingdom is mentioned with consistent reverence and need. They call it Alashiya. Modern scholars are nearly certain this was the ancient name for Cyprus. These clay tablets reveal Alashiya not as a military superpower, but as an economic one, a trusted trading partner who dispatched shiploads of copper with the reliability of a heartbeat. The island's geology made it a natural warehouse. Its rugged Troodos Mountains are rich in copper ore, and the archaeological record shows mining and smelting on an industrial scale. At sites like Politico-Forades, we find the remains of ancient furnaces and massive piles of slag, the waste material left over from extracting pure copper from rock. The scale of this operation was staggering, turning Cyprus into the undisputed copper king of the eastern Mediterranean. Yet the true genius of the system lay in the pairing. Cyprus produced the abundant copper, but it lacked its own major tin sources. So the island became the grand central mixing station of the Bronze Age. Tin, having traveled thousands of miles from the east or the west, would converge at bustling port cities on the Levantine coast, like Ugarit in modern-day Syria. There, in harbors thick with the smell of salt and pine pitch, merchants and officials would oversee the final, crucial step: ingots of Cypriot copper, cast in their distinctive oxhide shape for easy stacking in a ship's hold, were loaded alongside smaller, rarer ingots of gleaming tin. This was the complete bronze kit, a balanced alloy waiting to happen. A ship like the Uluburun, which sank with its cargo intact, perfectly encapsulates this moment. Its hull contained 10 tons of Cypriot copper and 1 ton of tin, the ideal 9-to-1 ratio for creating bronze, all stored together. This was not an accident of cargo, it was a deliberate strategy. By shipping the two metals together, the traders ensured that any palace or workshop receiving the shipment had everything it needed to begin production immediately. It turned a raw material delivery into a turnkey solution for civilization. The wealth and influence this brought Cyprus cannot be overstated. Kings of Alashiya corresponded as equals with the pharaohs of Egypt and the rulers of the Hittite Empire, their letters often negotiating the terms of these vital copper shipments. The island's position made it a neutral hub, a place where the trade winds of the Mediterranean and the overland routes from the east could finally meet and combine their treasures. So while the hunt for tin was a sprawling mystery spanning continents, the role of Cyprus was one of brilliant, reliable synthesis. It was the stable anchor in a volatile network, the constant in an equation of variables, proving that in this first global age, the power to produce was just as vital as the power to discover. This sprawling network of trade, stretching from the Atlantic to Afghanistan, could never have functioned on handshakes and goodwill alone. Its true foundation was built on something far more concrete, a shared language of weight and shape. Across the wreck sites of sunken ships and the storerooms of scattered palaces, archaeologists find a remarkable consistency. The most iconic symbol of this age is not a sword or a crown, but a lump of metal cast into a peculiar form, the oxhide ingot. These rectangular slabs of copper with 4 extended corners that made them easier to carry with poles have been found from Sardinia to the Black Sea. Their uniformity is no accident. An ingot cast in a Cypriot workshop needed to be instantly recognizable and verifiable by a merchant in Mycenaean or a royal official in Egypt. This standardized shape was a brand, a guarantee of purity and weight that transcended language barriers. It meant a trader did not have to remelt and test every piece of metal he received. He could trust the form itself. This visual trust was paired with an even more crucial system, a shared metrology. Different cultures did use their own local weight units, like the Mesopotamian shekel or the Aegean talent, but crucially, these systems were mathematically compatible. They were often based on simple, reproducible natural standards, like the weight of a specific number of grains of barley. A merchant could carry his own set of stone weights and, through a basic ratio, agree on a fair exchange with a partner from a completely different civilization. This was the silent, practical genius that held the entire Bronze Age world together. Standardization slashed what economists call transaction costs. Imagine the alternative for a moment. Without common shapes and weights, every single trade negotiation would descend into exhausting haggling, testing, and suspicion. Was this lump of tin pure, or was it mixed with lead? Did that ingot of copper contain the amount of metal it appeared to? The time and risk involved would have made long-distance trade impossibly slow and costly. But with these shared standards, a deal could be struck with remarkable efficiency. A ship's captain could present his cargo of oxhide ingots. A merchant could counter with bags of grain or bars of silver measured against his own weights, and both parties could have confidence in the value being exchanged. This system did more than move metal. It built a framework of international trust. It created a predictable, rule-based environment where strangers could do business. That predictability is what allowed a Mycenaean palace to send an order for tin to a Levantine port city, confident that what arrived months later would match the agreed-upon amount. It turned the chaotic, multilingual ports of the ancient world into the first true marketplaces, where value was abstract and portable, no longer tied solely to the immediate usefulness of an object. In this sense, these bronze ingots and weight stones were the direct precursors to coined money. They were a step away from bartering goods for goods and toward using metal itself, measured in trusted units, as a medium for all exchange. The oxhide ingot was more than convenient packaging. It was a passport, a certificate of authenticity that let raw materials flow across cultural borders as smoothly as water. This invisible infrastructure of agreed-upon rules is what transformed a collection of isolated trades into a single, humming global economy, proving that commerce, long before empires, was already teaching humanity how to speak a common language. Yet behind every oxhide ingot and standardized weight was a human being, a professional whose entire life was dedicated to navigating this fragile web. We often picture the Bronze Age through its most dramatic artifacts, the gold death masks of warrior kings and the gleaming swords of heroes. But the true architects of this interconnected world were not the rulers in their palaces, but the merchants on the roads and the seas. These individuals formed history's first professional transnational class, operating in a space between empires with a savvy that often rivaled royal power. They were not free agents in a modern sense. Most operated under what we might call a royal license or franchise. A king or a temple would provide the initial capital, a loan of silver or goods, and the merchant would undertake a trading expedition with the obligation to return a hefty profit. The famous Assyrian merchant archives from Kanesh detail this relationship with stunning clarity. A typical contract might record that a palace official advanced 20 minas of tin to a merchant named Pylos Asher, with the expectation that he would travel to Anatolia, sell it, and return with a specified amount of silver plus interest. The merchant kept any profit beyond that agreed-upon return. This system gave the state a reliable revenue stream from trade without having to micromanage every caravan, and it gave the merchant a powerful incentive to succeed. Their lives were defined by calculated risk. The overland routes were plagued by bandits, demanding local chieftains, and the sheer unpredictability of weather and geography. A single washed-out ford or an aggressive tribe could mean the loss of an entire investment and potentially the merchant's life. Maritime traders faced the perils of storms, piracy, and treacherous coastlines, as the Uluburun wreck so tragically illustrates. Letters from these merchants preserved on clay are filled with very human anxieties. They complain about the high cost of tolls, warn partners about unsafe roads, and fret over market prices fluctuating before they can arrive. One Assyrian merchant writes home to his wife, instructing her to sell a certain commodity if prices are good, but to hold it if they are low, revealing a sophisticated understanding of markets across a distance. These were not simple peddlers, they were CEOs of one-person multinational corporations. Their role extended far beyond moving metal and textiles. They were the primary vectors for the spread of ideas and technologies across the ancient world. A merchant traveling from Mesopotamia to Anatolia would not only bring tin, he would bring the concept of cylinder seals for marking property, new styles of jewelry, and perhaps even innovative techniques for alloying metals. A ship's captain from the Levant, docking in an Aegean harbor, might share knowledge of celestial navigation or introduce a new design for a more efficient pottery kiln. This constant, low-level exchange of practical knowledge was as transformative as the trade in goods. It created a shared cultural vocabulary around luxury, administration, and innovation that bound disparate civilizations together. The merchant, therefore, was the quiet diplomat and the accidental technologist. His success depended on building trust across cultural lines, learning foreign languages and customs, and understanding what each society valued. In a very real sense, these individuals wove the social fabric of the Bronze Age world, thread by careful thread, long before emperors ever dreamed of conquest on such a scale. Their legacy is not recorded in epic poetry, but in the quiet diffusion of a potter's wheel design, the widespread adoption of a weight standard, and the simple fact that a king in Greece could wield a sword made from metals born a continent apart. But the flow of bronze was not driven by commerce alone. In the hushed audience chambers of royal palaces, another, more subtle exchange was taking place, one where tin and bronze were not commodities but carriers of meaning. For the great kings of the late Bronze Age, the most vital transactions were often wrapped not in contracts, but in ceremony. Our clearest window into this world comes from a cache of clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Akhenaten, the capital city of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. Known as the Amarna letters, these are the diplomatic correspondence of the age, the official emails exchanged between the rulers of Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Mitanni, Babylonia, Assyria, and the king of Alashiya, Cyprus. And within their formal, sometimes surprisingly petty complaints, we see a complete parallel economy operating at the highest level, the prestige economy of the gift exchange. In this system, the movement of tin and finished bronze objects had nothing to do with profit and everything to do with power and protocol. A typical letter might begin with extravagant greetings. Say to the king of Egypt, my brother, thus says the king of Babylonia, your brother, I and my household, my horses, my chariots, my officials are all very well. After the pleasantries, the core request or acknowledgement would follow, often centered on gifts. The king of Babylonia might write, you have sent me 20 minas of tin as my greeting gift. But why such a small amount? Send me much more tin, and I will send you whatever you wish for. The tone is fascinating. It oscillates between flattery and thinly veiled accusation, between brotherly love and hard bargaining over the symbolism of generosity. This was not trade in the merchant's sense. The quantities mentioned, while valuable, were often modest, symbolic. The sending of tin, or magnificent finished bronze vessels or luxury textiles, served a profound political purpose. It was a public performance of alliance, a way of saying, we are of the same exalted rank. The gift created an obligation, a debt of honor that bound the receiver into a relationship. To accept a king's gift was to acknowledge his status and power, and to reciprocate with a gift of equal or greater value was essential to maintain faith and the alliance itself. The letters are full of kings meticulously listing what they have sent and pointedly noting the inferiority of what they have received in return. A Hittite king might complain that the gold statues sent by Egypt were not solid gold, but merely gold plated over wood, a grave insult to his royal dignity. In this context, a shipment of tin was far more than raw material. It was a token of respect, a piece of diplomatic language written in metal. This prestige economy operated in seamless tandem with the rough and tumble commercial networks of the Assyrian merchants and the Uluburun ships. They were two sides of the same bronze coin. The state controlled the high-value diplomatic flow, using it to weave a web of alliances and demonstrate its access to rare resources. Meanwhile, the merchant class handled the bulk, logistical flow that actually supplied the palace workshops and armies with the tons of metal needed to function. Often, these streams fed each other. The tin that arrived as a diplomatic gift from Egypt to the Hittite court would eventually find its way to the palace smiths, entering the economic bloodstream. Conversely, the commercial acquisition of tin gave a king the surplus he needed to engage in the lavish gift-giving that cemented his political standing. This duality reveals the sophisticated layers of the Bronze Age world. It was not a simple choice between markets and palaces, between economics and politics. It was an integrated system where a single ingot of tin could wear multiple hats. In a merchant's strongbox, it was capital, measured by weight and purity. In a royal treasury, it was a diplomatic asset, measured by the alliance it could secure. The same scarcity that drove caravans across continents also fueled the delicate dance of kings, proving that the value of a material is never just in what it is, but in what it represents, and in the ancient world, tin represented nothing less than the power to be seen as an equal among the masters of the earth. For all its complexity and reach, this global network possessed a deep and hidden fragility. The gleaming bronze world was held together by a delicate balance, one that could not withstand a cascade of simultaneous shocks. As the 13th century before the Common Era drew to a close, a perfect storm of disasters began to converge, each one straining the threads of trade and diplomacy until the entire tapestry unraveled. The first blow came from the sky itself. Tree ring and sediment core data from across the eastern Mediterranean paint a picture of a climate growing increasingly unstable. A prolonged period of drought and cooler temperatures set in, a shift that may have lasted for generations. For agricultural societies living on the edge of subsistence, this was a catastrophe in slow motion. Crop yields fell, pastures dried up, and the specter of famine began to stalk the land. The royal granaries, which once buffered against lean years, were slowly depleted. This environmental stress placed immense pressure on the very foundations of society, making populations restless, desperate, and more willing to abandon their homes in search of sustenance. This desperation fueled the second and most dramatic element of the collapse, the great waves of movement that ancient Egyptian inscriptions would later call the Sea Peoples. This was not a single invading army, but a chaotic mixture of displaced populations, opportunistic raiders, and warrior groups on the move, pushed by hunger and drawn by the fading wealth of the established kingdoms. These groups swept across the eastern Mediterranean in a series of violent migrations. They attacked coastal cities, disrupted shipping lanes, and overthrew local authorities. The Egyptian records, carved in stone at Medinet Habu, describe fierce naval battles where Pharaoh Ramesses III turned them back, but the cost was the devastation of nearly every other major power in the region. The Hittite Empire, that mighty Anatolian kingdom and a crucial linchpin in the overland trade routes, collapsed completely. Its capital of Hattusa burned and abandoned. The great Mycenaean palaces in Greece, from Pylos to Mycenae itself, were consumed by fire and violence, their linear administrative system vanishing into history. One by one, the nodes in the network went dark, and here we see the fatal flaw in the Bronze Age system. The long-distance trade in tin was not a natural force. It was a meticulously cultivated artifact of political order. It required stable kingdoms to enforce treaties along the overland routes from Central Asia. It required palace bureaucracies to coordinate the shipments of copper from Cyprus and to protect the merchant ships at sea. It required the diplomatic framework of the great kings to maintain the alliances that kept corridors open. When those palaces burned and those empires fell, the protection and regulation vanished overnight. The Assyrian merchant colonies in Anatolia were overrun, severing the land bridge to the east. Pirates and raiders made the sea lanes impassable, turning the Mediterranean from a highway into a barrier. The specialized merchants, the scribes who tracked the inventories, the diplomats who negotiated safe passage, all were scattered or lost. The system did not slowly wind down, it shattered. In a single generation, the knowledge of how to move tin from the mountains of Afghanistan to the forges of Greece was erased, not from memory, but from possibility. The world shrank back into isolated, struggling fragments. This was more than a political change. It was a technological and economic regression. With the trade routes severed, the supply of tin dried up. Bronze, the metal that defined the age, became impossibly scarce. Smiths hoarded and recycled existing metal, but eventually the vital ingredient was gone. The world that emerged from the ashes would have to find a new foundation, one built not on a fragile global web, but on a different kind of metal altogether. The scarcity of tin became a force of history in its own right. As the trade routes snapped, the lifeblood of the age simply stopped flowing. This was not a minor economic downturn. It was a catastrophic failure of a civilization's core infrastructure. The archaeological record tells a story of growing desperation in the decades leading up to the final collapse. Across the Aegean and Anatolia, we find strange, hidden caches, hordes of bronze objects buried in the ground by people who clearly intended to come back for them. These are not random collections, but carefully selected assemblages of broken swords, damaged axe heads, and shattered ingot fragments. They are not treasure, they are strategic reserves, the equivalent of a society desperately stockpiling its last remaining batteries. People were gathering every scrap of metal they could find, not for use but for safekeeping, sensing that the material that defined their world was becoming irreplaceable. Alongside this hoarding came a frantic wave of recycling. Bronze, unlike iron, can be melted down and recast almost indefinitely. As new tin became unobtainable, ancient smiths turned to the past. They gathered heirlooms, broken tools, and even ceremonial objects, melting them in their crucibles to forge new blades and implements. But each cycle of reuse had a cost. Impurities would accumulate, and without fresh tin to rebalance the alloy, the metal would grow progressively weaker. This decline in quality is starkly visible in the weapons from this turbulent period. Swords become thinner, more brittle, their edges losing the lethal sharpness of earlier centuries. Spear points are crudely cast with porous metal that could shatter on impact. The magnificent bronze of the palace workshops was gone, replaced by a pale, inferior shadow. This material decay had direct and devastating consequences for the social order. The power of a Mycenaean wanax or a Hittite king was not abstract. It was enforced by armed retainers, soldiers equipped with the best weapons the palace could provide. Bronze was the currency of loyalty. A king who could not arm his followers was a king who could not command their service. As the supply of quality weapons dried up, the very glue that held these hierarchical societies together began to dissolve. Local warlords or community leaders, perhaps holding their own small hoards of metal, could no longer be reliably controlled by a distant, weakening central authority. The monopoly on violence, a key pillar of the Bronze Age state, fragmented along with the bronze itself. This created a vicious, self-accelerating cycle. As central control weakened, it became even harder to protect the remaining long-distance trade routes or mount coordinated defenses against raiders. The scarcity caused military weakness, which in turn made the scarcity permanent. Societies did not just run out of tin, they unraveled because of it. The collapse of the bronze trade was not merely a symptom of a dying world. It was the poison in its veins, ensuring that a temporary crisis became a terminal one, leaving behind a landscape where the very knowledge of how to make a proper bronze sword was itself a memory fading into legend. The great network fell silent. For centuries after the collapse, the world that remained was a smaller, quieter, and far poorer place. This era, often called the Greek Dark Age, was not a time of complete ignorance but of profound contraction. The sprawling, interconnected system of the Bronze Age shrunk back to the scale of the village and the valley. Trade routes that once pulsed with oxhide ingots and diplomatic envoys now carried little more than local pottery and basic necessities. The grand palaces were ruins, their linear B tablets baked and buried, their languages forgotten. In their place stood simple, mud brick homes clustered for protection, a material culture stripped of its former international flair. The exquisite Mycenaean pottery, once decorated with intricate patterns and traded across the Mediterranean, was replaced by plain, functional ware. The gleaming bronze gave way to more humble materials, and the art of writing itself vanished from the Greek world for hundreds of years. This was a time of localization, where community survival depended on what could be grown or made within walking distance, not on shipments from across the sea. This fragmentation meant a radical break with the past. The knowledge that had powered the Bronze Age, the intricate mental maps of merchants, became obsolete and then legendary. The specific locations of tin mines in distant Cornwall or the far-off mountains of Central Asia were no longer vital information for a struggling farmer or a local chieftain. Over generations, the precise trade routes, the names of foreign ports, the complex ratios for alloying bronze, all faded from practical memory. What remained were likely half-remembered tales, stories of a time when heroes wielded shining weapons made from a metal that seemed to have vanished from the earth. The tin trade was not just interrupted, it was conceptually lost. The technological and economic continuity that had defined the preceding centuries was severed. A smith in this new age might know how to work metal, but he would not know how to procure the tin needed to make true bronze. He might inherit a few cherished bronze heirlooms, but not the global system that created them. This created a profound historical amnesia. The people of the 10th or 9th century before the Common Era lived literally atop the ruins of a civilization whose scale and sophistication they could scarcely comprehend. They plowed fields that covered the foundations of massive citadels, and they used stones from cyclopean walls for their own simple homes, unaware of the intricate world that those stones once supported. The internationalism of the late Bronze Age, with its shared weight standards and diplomatic letters between kings, must have seemed like a myth from another world. The isolation was so complete that when writing finally returned to Greece, it was a new alphabet adapted from the Phoenicians, with no connection to the lost script of the linear B administrators. This break was not merely political, it was cognitive. The very idea of a world connected by long-distance exchange for a single, critical commodity had to be rediscovered. The silence that followed the collapse was, in a way, the sound of the map being redrawn, not by empires but by forgetting. And in that quiet, a new metal was slowly emerging from the forge, one that would not require a global network to produce, but would one day help build a new kind of world in its own image. From the quiet isolation of the Dark Age, a new kind of ship eventually appeared on the horizon. It was sleeker than the old Mycenaean galleys, built not for kings but for commerce, and it was piloted by a people who turned necessity into a global enterprise. These were the Phoenicians, master sailors from the narrow coastal strip of modern Lebanon, and they would become the architects of the Mediterranean's second act. With the great Bronze Age powers gone, the Phoenicians faced a simple, pressing reality. Their homeland was rich in cedar wood and skilled crafts, but poor in almost every other resource, especially metals. To survive and thrive, they had no choice but to look outward, to revive the art of long-distance trade that had been all but lost. In doing so, they did not merely copy the old networks, they reinvented them for a new age, becoming the direct successors to the Minoan and Mycenaean maritime traders, but with a ruthlessly practical, mercantile focus. Their strategy was brilliant and systematic. Instead of relying on unstable overland routes or the patronage of crumbling palaces, they established something far more durable, a chain of permanent trading colonies across the Mediterranean. These were not attempts to conquer vast territories, but secure way stations, fortified ports where their merchants could rest, resupply, and exchange goods with local peoples. Their most famous foundation was Carthage in North Africa, but their reach extended to Sicily, Sardinia, and the coast of North Africa. Yet their most daring venture was through the Strait of Gibraltar, a passage the Greeks called the Pillars of Hercules and considered the edge of the known world. Just beyond this strait, on the Atlantic coast of what is now Spain, they founded the colony of Gadea, modern Cadiz, and here the story of tin takes a fascinating turn. Ancient writers like the Greek historian Herodotus later reported a strange Phoenician practice. He wrote that merchants from Gadea would sail north to a place called the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, where they would trade with local inhabitants for precious metal. While the exact location is debated, the description strongly points to Cornwall in southwestern Britain, the same tin-rich peninsula that may have supplied the Minoans centuries before. The Phoenicians, in their relentless search for resources, likely did not discover this route so much as they rediscovered it, reactivating an ancient Atlantic highway that had fallen silent after the Bronze Age collapse. Their method was ingenious and secretive. According to the tales, the trade was conducted through silent barter. The Phoenicians would land on a beach, lay out their goods, perhaps fine textiles, glass beads, or wine, and then retreat to their ships. The local people would then come down, inspect the goods, place beside them what they considered a fair amount of tin, and also withdraw. The Phoenicians would return, and if they were satisfied with the amount, they would take the tin and leave, completing the trade without a single word being spoken. This ritual, whether entirely accurate or not, speaks to a profound truth. The Phoenicians were not conquerors of this distant land. They were careful, respectful intermediaries who understood that access to the resource depended on maintaining a peaceful, predictable relationship with the source community. This Atlantic tin route, flowing from Cornwall to Gadea, and then eastward through the strait into the Mediterranean, became a cornerstone of their wealth. It gave them a virtual monopoly on a material that was once again becoming critically important, for as the Iron Age progressed, bronze had not disappeared, it had evolved. It was no longer the sole metal of power, but it remained essential for countless applications where iron was unsuitable, from intricate statuary and mirrors to ship fittings and certain types of armor. The classical world of the Greeks and later the Romans still ran on bronze, and they needed tin to make it. The Phoenicians positioned themselves as the indispensable suppliers. They became the vital link between the raw, mineral wealth of the Atlantic fringe and the rising civilizations of the Mediterranean basin. Their ships carried Cornish tin eastward, along with Spanish silver and British gold, feeding the workshops of a resurgent world. In this way, the Phoenicians did more than just trade. They laid the entire logistical groundwork for the classical world's metal supply. They proved that the global network, though shattered, could be rewired, and that the ghost of the Bronze Age tin trade still had a role to play in building everything that came after. Yet for all the vivid stories told by shipwrecks and clay tablets, one question has remained stubbornly elusive in the modern lab. Where exactly did each piece of tin begin its journey? The answer is locked inside the metal itself, a chemical secret that archaeologists have spent decades trying to decode. This is the scientific frontier of provenance, the detective work of matching an ancient artifact to its precise geological birthplace. For other metals, this task has clear solutions. Lead and copper, for instance, carry a kind of isotopic passport. The ratios of different forms of these elements, created over billions of years in unique geological environments, create a fingerprint that can often be traced back to a specific mine or region. A copper ingot from Cyprus has a different isotopic signature than one from the Alps, allowing scientists to map its origin with impressive confidence. But tin is a different kind of puzzle, a metal that has long resisted this straightforward identification. The isotopic systems in tin are far more subtle and less variable. The differences from one deposit to another are incredibly slight, often falling within a narrow range that makes it extremely difficult to say with certainty that this ingot came from Cornwall and that one from Afghanistan. It is as if every tin mine in the world spoke with almost the same accent, leaving modern scientists straining to hear the faintest whisper of distinction. This scientific challenge mirrors the historical mystery perfectly. The ancient merchants guarded their sources, and the metal itself seems determined to keep its secrets. So how do researchers begin to crack a case where the primary evidence is so reluctant to speak? They turn to more complex, indirect methods, building a case from multiple lines of subtle evidence. One promising avenue is tin isotope analysis itself, pushed to its absolute technical limits. While the variations are minute, advanced mass spectrometry can now measure them with breathtaking precision. Scientists are building a growing database of samples from known ancient tin mines across Europe and Asia, from Cornwall to the Erzgebirge to the distant highlands of Central Asia. By comparing the isotopic signature of an archaeological tin object, like a small ingot from a shipwreck, against this database, they can sometimes narrow the possibilities. It might not point to a single mine, but it can often rule out entire regions, telling us definitively that a particular batch of tin did not come from, say, Western Europe, pointing the search firmly eastward. Another critical method looks not at the pure tin, but at the messy byproducts of its creation. When tin ore is smelted, the process leaves behind slag, a glassy waste material that contains traces of everything that was in the original rock. This slag is a chemical snapshot of the local geology. The unique mix of trace elements like tantalum or niobium can be as distinctive as a regional recipe. So while a purified tin ingot might be chemically shy, the slag associated with its production is often far more talkative. Finding that slag at an archaeological site, or matching trace element impurities still trapped within a finished ingot, can provide the crucial contextual clue that isotopic analysis alone cannot. The current frontier of research involves combining these techniques, weaving together threads of isotopic data, trace element chemistry, and even the study of how the ingot was cast, its shape and manufacturing style. It is a painstaking, collaborative effort, a global scientific network slowly reverse engineering the ancient one. Each new discovery adds a piece to the map. For example, analyses of tin artifacts from the Eastern Mediterranean have increasingly pointed toward Central Asian sources, lending strong material support to the hypothesis of those long overland routes. Meanwhile, the search for a chemical signature unique to Cornish tin continues, hoping to confirm the Phoenician and perhaps even Minoan Atlantic connection with hard data. This work transforms our understanding from a collection of compelling theories into a verified material history. It is the process of turning whispers into evidence, proving that even after 3,000 years, the silent cargo of those ancient ships still has a story to tell if we know how to listen. The whispers of those ancient voyages never truly vanished. They simply changed shape, transforming from merchant ledgers into epic poetry and the curious travelogues of later historians. Long after the Bronze Age palaces had crumbled to dust, classical Greek writers like Herodotus were still telling stories about a mysterious, distant source of tin. He called it the Cassiterides, the Tin Islands, a fog-shrouded place at the very edge of the world beyond the Pillars of Hercules. His description is vague, a mixture of second-hand report and geographical rumor, but the core detail is strikingly specific. He writes that tin is brought from these islands to a trading port in Gaul, and from there, overland into the heart of the Mediterranean. This account, written centuries after the collapse, reads like a distorted echo, a folk memory of the very Atlantic tin route that the Phoenicians had reactivated, and that may have existed even in Minoan times. The Cassiterides were likely the tin-rich lands of Cornwall and possibly the Scilly Isles off Britain's coast. Herodotus, living in a world where tin once again flowed through known Phoenician channels, was recording not a discovery, but a legend of origin, a story that had survived the long silence of the Dark Age. It is as if the geography of the Bronze Age trade had been compressed and mythologized, its complex network of miners, merchants, and sailors simplified into a single, almost magical location at the end of the earth. This preservation of a material truth within a fantastical tale shows how deeply the quest for tin was woven into the cultural memory of the ancient world. Even more fantastical and perhaps more revealing is the greatest sea quest of Greek mythology, the voyage of the Argo. The story of Jason and his crew of heroes sailing to the far edge of the Black Sea in search of the Golden Fleece has all the elements of epic adventure. But scholars have long wondered if this legend, too, holds a kernel of historical truth about the ancient hunger for resources. The Golden Fleece itself is a curious object. One compelling interpretation is that it represents a prospecting technology. In some gold-rich regions, like ancient Colchis at the eastern end of the Black Sea, sheepskins were used to trap gold dust from placer deposits in mountain streams. The fleece would be placed in the water, and its thick wool would catch the fine flakes of gold, which could later be shaken or combed out. A fleece crusted with gold dust would literally be a golden fleece, a symbol of immense wealth and of the specialized knowledge required to extract it. Under this reading, Jason's quest was not for a simple trophy, but for the very secret of obtaining precious metal. His journey to the remote, myth-laden shores of Colchis mirrors the real, perilous voyages of Bronze Age explorers and merchants who ventured into unknown territories seeking the sources of copper, gold, and tin. The Argo becomes a metaphor for the prospecting ship, its crew a band of specialist adventurers braving treacherous seas and strange peoples to secure the foundational wealth of their homeland. The trials they face, the clashing rocks and the sleepless dragon, could be poetic representations of the very real dangers of navigation, piracy, and guarding valuable trade secrets. When we read these classical texts not just as literature or early history, but as palimpsests, we begin to see the faint, watermarked lines of a much older story showing through. The tales of the Cassiterides and the Argonauts are not random fictions. They are cultural artifacts that preserve, in a deeply encoded way, the monumental effort and profound significance of the Bronze Age resource quest. They remember a time when the fate of kingdoms hinged on long-distance voyages to the literal edges of the map. These legends transform the merchant's calculated risk into the hero's trial, and the trade route into a path of myth. They tell us that the pursuit of tin and gold was so central, so formative to the ancient world's sense of itself, that it could not be forgotten, even when the precise mechanisms of that trade had been lost. The stories became the container for the memory, ensuring that the awe and the ambition of that first global age would echo down the centuries, waiting for a time when we could piece together the literal shipwrecks and begin to understand the true journeys that inspired them. The single Uluburun ship carried enough metal to forge a small army. Its hold contained 10 tons of Cypriot copper and 1 ton of tin, the precise ratio for creating 11 tons of bronze. That is a staggering amount of raw power in one vessel. But this shipwreck was not a unique event. It was a snapshot of business as usual. So what does its cargo tell us about the true annual scale of this ancient enterprise? If one merchant vessel could be carrying such a valuable load, we must envision dozens, perhaps hundreds of similar ships plying the Mediterranean each year. The demand from palaces across Greece, Anatolia, and the Levant was insatiable. To keep just one major kingdom like the Hittite Empire supplied would require a constant, rolling convoy of ships and caravans, a stream of metal flowing without end. The numbers quickly become astronomical. To produce the bronze artifacts we have found from this era, and to account for all that has been lost or recycled, scholars estimate that hundreds of tons of tin moved across the ancient world over the course of a century. This was not a trickle, it was a torrent. The logistics behind this torrent are almost unimaginable to us today. Let us follow just 1 ton of tin, like that on the Uluburun, back to its source. If it came from the distant mines of Central Asia, its journey began with miners laboring in narrow, dark tunnels, extracting ore with stone hammers and fire. After smelting, the raw metal would be cast into ingots. Then came the caravan. A single donkey can carry roughly 100 pounds. To move 1 ton of tin would require a train of at least 20 animals. But this is just the cargo. The caravan would also need pack animals for food, water, and supplies for the men guiding them. So a modest shipment might involve 30 or 40 animals and a team of handlers. This procession then had to traverse over 1,500 miles of mountain passes and arid plains, a journey taking many months. At every river crossing and mountain valley, local chieftains would expect a toll, a tax paid in silver or a portion of the precious tin itself. By the time the ingots reached a Levantine port like Ugarit, their value had multiplied many times over, reflecting every mile of risk and negotiation. Then the sea voyage began. A ship like the Uluburun, perhaps 30 feet long, was crewed by a multinational team of experienced sailors. Their lives depended on knowledge passed down through generations, understanding seasonal winds, hidden reefs, and safe harbors. Piracy was a constant threat, making these voyages armed and dangerous ventures. The sheer number of people involved in moving a single shipment from mine to palace is breathtaking. Hundreds of hands, from the miner swinging his hammer to the merchant haggling in a foreign port to the scribe recording the ingot's weight in a palace ledger, all were links in this immense chain. And this chain had to operate year after year across political upheavals and shifting alliances. The failure of any single link, a war blocking a mountain pass or a storm sinking a few key ships, could trigger a regional bronze shortage, a crisis that could weaken a kingdom's military power overnight. The economic value represented by this trade is difficult to overstate. In an age before coinage, wealth was measured in tangible goods, and tin was literally worth its weight in silver. Cuneiform texts from Mesopotamia often equate them. Imagine the capital required to finance these operations. A merchant needed upfront silver to purchase the tin, to pay caravan guards and ship captains, and to cover all the tariffs along the way. He would not see a return on this investment for a year or more. This required not just individual wealth, but sophisticated systems of credit and trust, like those seen in the Assyrian merchant colonies. The palaces themselves were the ultimate bankers, advancing metals to trusted merchants with the expectation of a profitable return. The entire Bronze Age economy, with its specialized craftsmen, its standing armies, and its monumental architecture, was ultimately built on the creditworthiness of a tin ingot sitting in a ship's hold somewhere on the open sea. This was a world running on a form of futures trading, where the promise of metal from a distant mountain financed the splendors of today's civilization. The scale was not just about tonnage, it was about the faith required to move it. But the true legacy of those ships and caravans was not measured in tonnage alone. The physical network that moved tin became a living artery for something far more transformative than metal. It carried the seeds of ideas, the blueprints for technologies, and the very images that would define an age. This exchange created what scholars call a koine, a common cultural language that spanned from the Aegean to the Indus Valley, a shared vocabulary of power, belief, and beauty that was broadcast along the trade routes. Consider the chariot, the supreme symbol of Bronze Age elite warfare and status. Its adoption was a technological revolution that swept across the ancient world with astonishing speed. The concept likely originated in the steppe regions of Central Asia or the Near East, but its sophisticated design, featuring spoked wheels for lightness and speed, did not spread by conquest alone. It traveled with the traders. A merchant carrying tin from the east would have described, or perhaps even transported, key components of the chariot kit, the innovative wheel design or the specific shape of the axle. Local smiths, already skilled in bronze working thanks to that same trade, could then replicate and adapt the technology. Within a few generations, Egyptian pharaohs were hunting from lightweight chariots. Mycenaean kings were depicted riding them into battle on frescoes, and Hittite armies built their strategies around chariot core. This was not independent invention. It was a package deal with the knowledge of how to build the vehicle flowing along the same channels that supplied the bronze for its fittings and weapons. The artistic record paints this shared culture in vivid color. A palace fresco in Minoan Crete might show a griffin, a mythical beast with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. Centuries later and thousands of miles away, a similar griffin appears on a seal carved in the Indus Valley civilization. The motif of a hero mastering wild animals, often lions, appears on cylinder seals in Mesopotamia, on gold cups in Mycenae, and in the art of Anatolia. These were not mere coincidences. Artisans and scribes moved with the merchants, carrying sketchbooks in their minds, transferring styles and symbols from one royal court to another. A gifted painter from Cyprus might find employment decorating a palace in Greece, bringing with him a repertoire of spiral patterns and marine motifs that would then influence local artists. The trade in luxury goods like intricately carved ivory or delicate faience jewelry served as a portable gallery, displaying the latest artistic trends and inspiring imitation across cultures. Even religious concepts hitched a ride on these routes. The worship of certain deities, like the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war, Ishtar, or the storm god, spread and syncretized with local gods along the trade corridors. Her symbols might be adopted and adapted, blending with existing beliefs to create new hybrid forms of worship. This was a slow, organic process of cultural borrowing, made possible by the constant, low-level contact between peoples who were regularly doing business. Perhaps most fundamentally, the necessities of trade demanded a degree of linguistic exchange. While merchants may have used translators, they also likely developed a basic pidgin, a simplified language of commerce to negotiate prices, discuss quality, and arrange transport. Key technical terms for metals, weights, and commodities would have been borrowed from one language into another, leaving traces that linguists can still detect. The movement of people was constant, not just merchants, but also skilled craftsmen, healers, and scribes seeking patronage in foreign courts. Each of them was a vessel for knowledge, carrying techniques for pottery glazing, new musical instruments, medical remedies, or administrative practices. The tin trade, therefore, was the backbone for a vast, informal university of the ancient world. Its primary cargo was bronze, but its hidden freight was the collective imagination of an entire era, connecting distant mines and allowing them to build quite literally upon each other's dreams. This invisible exchange meant that a farmer in Greece and a scribe in Mesopotamia, while never meeting, lived in worlds that were subtly but profoundly shaped by the same circulating currents of innovation and art. The metal forged weapons, but the ideas traveling with it forged a common civilization. This deep interdependence was the source of both its majesty and its peril. The Bronze Age world system stands as a powerful, ancient mirror to our own era of globalization, revealing a timeless truth about interconnected societies. Their prosperity was built on a foundation of astonishing reach and cooperation, but that same foundation created a vulnerability to shocks that could ripple across continents. Just as our modern economies depend on the seamless flow of semiconductors, rare earth minerals, and container ships, the Bronze Age kingdoms depended on the uninterrupted journey of tin from mine to palace. This was not a loose collection of trading partners. It was a tightly integrated system where the military strength of a king in Greece was directly tied to the political stability of a mountain pass in Anatolia and the safe passage of a ship off the coast of Cyprus. The elite power structure, the very technology that defined the age, and the cultural prestige of the ruling class all rested on this delicate, far-flung web. When the network functioned, it created an unprecedented golden age of wealth and exchange, but its complexity masked a profound fragility. A modern supply chain crisis might delay a consumer electronic or raise the price of a car. In the late Bronze Age, a similar disruption did not cause inconvenience, it triggered civilizational collapse. The system had no backup, no alternative source for its most critical ingredient. There were no stockpiles large enough to outlast a multi-year breakdown, and no other metal ready to take bronze's place immediately. This interdependence meant that a crisis in one corner of the system could cascade with devastating speed. A drought-causing famine in Anatolia could lead to social unrest that closed overland routes. Those blocked routes would then starve the Aegean palaces of tin, weakening their armies just as displaced populations began raiding their coasts. The failure was not merely additive, it was multiplicative, each broken link straining the next until the entire chain snapped. The elite, whose power was derived from controlling this flow of bronze, found their authority evaporating when the flow ceased. They could not arm their soldiers, they could not fulfill diplomatic gift exchanges, and they could not project the material splendor that justified their rule. Their legitimacy was quite literally alloyed with a metal they could no longer obtain. This historical case study offers a sobering lesson about the nature of complex systems. The very efficiencies that make them so powerful, the specialization and the long-distance logistics, also make them brittle. They optimize for prosperity under stable conditions, but often lack the resilience to withstand multiple, simultaneous shocks. The Bronze Age collapse reminds us that globalization is not a permanent state, but a condition that requires constant maintenance, protection, and a degree of luck. It shows that the threads connecting a world, however strong they seem, can unravel with surprising speed when the pillars of climate, political order, and security begin to wobble in unison. The silence that followed was the sound of a world contracting, of knowledge shrinking back into local pockets, a reminder that the lights of a connected age can go out, leaving behind only fragments and legends for those who come after. Even with all we have uncovered, the map of the bronze trade remains dotted with question marks, its lines still faint in crucial places. The great puzzle of the Bronze Age is solved in its broad strokes, but the fine details, the exact percentages, and the secret voyages are still hotly debated by historians and archaeologists today. One of the most significant debates centers on the balance of supply. We know both Central Asian and European tin reached the Mediterranean, but in what proportion? Was the flow from the Afghan highlands the dominant lifeline for Mesopotamia and the Levant, with European metal being a secondary trickle? Or did Cornish tin, traveling the long Atlantic route, contribute a substantial share to the great mixing pots of the Eastern kingdoms? The chemical fingerprinting of artifacts will one day provide a definitive answer, but for now, the ledger remains open. This is not just academic trivia. The answer reshapes our understanding of geopolitical power. If Afghan tin was primary, then the fortunes of Egypt and Babylon were tied to the stability of a caravan route thousands of miles long. If European tin was significant, then the Minoan and Phoenician mastery of the West was an even greater strategic triumph. The truth likely lies in a shifting balance, where political turmoil in one region would suddenly elevate the importance of the other, making the network resilient until the moment both sources were cut off simultaneously. Equally compelling is the mystery of direct contact. How far did the Bronze Age mariners of the Mediterranean truly venture? Did a Minoan ship with its distinctive sail ever anchor off the rocky shores of Cornwall, trading directly with the miners there? Or was the transfer always handled through a long chain of intermediaries, with the original source remaining a land of legend to the palace dwellers? The archaeological evidence for such a direct voyage is so far elusive. We have no Minoan pottery shard definitively found in a Cornish streamworks, no linear B tablet that lists a shipment from the Isles of Tin. Yet the circumstantial case is strong. The seafaring technology existed, the motivation was overwhelming, and the distribution of certain artifact styles hints at long-distance cultural echoes. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It simply means the sea has not yet given up that particular shipwreck. Every season, underwater archaeologists survey new stretches of coastline, knowing that a single discovery could turn a bold hypothesis into established history. This leads to the final, grand logistical unknown, the precise mechanics of the Atlantic route. We can trace it on a map from Cornwall to Brittany to Iberia, but how did it function in practice? Were there dedicated deep-sea vessels making the entire run, or was it a coast-hugging relay where goods changed hands at every major river estuary? Who were the sailors, and what language did they use to negotiate with the diverse communities along the way? The silent trade described by Herodotus, with goods laid on a beach, suggests a relationship built on cautious ritual rather than shared vocabulary. This route was the Wild West of its day, operating beyond the reach of any great king's bureaucracy, sustained by tradition, mutual benefit, and raw courage. Its very existence is a testament to human ingenuity, but its daily rhythms are lost to us, preserved only in the faintest of echoes. This is the enduring allure of the Bronze Age tin trade. It is not a closed case, but a living mystery. Each newly discovered shipwreck, like the Uluburun, is a time capsule that can confirm Chinese letter our theories. Every advance in archaeometallurgy, allowing us to read the subtle chemistry of an ingot, brings us closer to mapping the ancient world's circulatory system in vivid detail. A farmer's plow turning up a strange hoard, or a satellite image revealing a forgotten caravan stop in a Central Asian desert. These moments have the power to rewrite a paragraph, a page, or even a chapter of this story. The search continues because the stakes are so profoundly human. It is the story of how our ancestors first learned to connect a world, to rely on strangers across unimaginable distances, and to build something magnificent on a foundation of shared need. The bronze may have dulled, but the quest to understand it has never been more alive. The collapse of the bronze network was not the end of tin's story. Iron, a metal far more common in the Earth's crust, did indeed rise to become the new backbone for plows and swords, forging a different kind of age. But to think that tin simply vanished from history is to misunderstand the relentless adaptability of human need. The demand for this once pivotal metal did not disappear, it transformed. As iron took over the heavy work of cutting and killing, tin found its new calling in the arts of peace and connection. It became the essential ingredient in pewter, a malleable alloy used for tableware, tankards, and decorative objects in households across the Roman world and medieval Europe. Even more crucially, tin's low melting point and ability to bond with other metals made it the heart of solder. This unglamorous but vital application meant tin was now the hidden glue of civilization, sealing the seams of copper pots, joining pipes for water systems, and later, making possible the intricate circuits of every electrical connection we have today. Its role shifted from the flash of a battlefield to the quiet, essential work of holding things together. This enduring utility ensured that the mines of Cornwall and the Erzgebirge never fell completely silent, their output simply flowing into new channels of commerce. Perhaps the most profound legacy, however, was not in the metal itself, but in the paths it carved across the world. The trade routes first established by Bronze Age merchants hunting for tin became the skeletal framework of Eurasian commerce. These were the original prototypes for the Silk Roads, the overland corridor from Central Asia to Mesopotamia, worn smooth by donkey caravans carrying tin ingots, would centuries later see bundles of Chinese silk and spices traveling in the opposite direction. The maritime highway through the Mediterranean, perfected by Minoan, Mycenaean, and Phoenician ships carrying copper and tin, became the central artery of Roman grain fleets and later Venetian and Genoese merchant empires. The Atlantic Seaway to Cornwall, explored for tin, established the geographical knowledge that would later bring Mediterranean wine and pottery to northern Europe and Celtic amber to the south. These routes were not forgotten during the so-called Dark Ages. They merely lay dormant, overgrown but not erased. They persisted in folk memory and in the physical reality of mountain passes and sheltered harbors, waiting to be reactivated. The Phoenicians did not invent the route to Cornwall, they remembered it. The amber road through Central Europe never truly vanished, it simply carried different treasures. What the Bronze Age tin trade created was a template, a logistical and social blueprint for how to connect a continent. It proved that long-distance exchange on a massive scale was not only possible but profitable. It fostered the first professional merchant class, developed systems of weights, measures, and credit, and necessitated a degree of diplomatic negotiation and cultural exchange between vastly different peoples. It demonstrated that resources in one corner of the world could fuel civilizations in another, creating a mutual dependency that, while fragile, could generate unparalleled periods of wealth and innovation. When later empires arose, from the Persians to the Romans, they did not build their trade networks from scratch. They paved over these ancient Bronze Age tracks, widened them, and protected them with their legions. But the fundamental directions were already set by merchants following a ghostly trail of cassiterite, the tin ore that glittered like a promise at the end of the known world. In this way, the story of bronze is never just about a metal. It is about the first great web humanity ever wove, a web whose strands, spun for one urgent purpose, ended up holding the shape of history itself for thousands of years to come. The true measure of an age is found not only in its grandest monuments, but in the scarcest of its ingredients. For over 2,000 years, the entire trajectory of civilization was bent toward the acquisition of a single, elusive metal. This was not a side quest in history, it was the main plot. The Bronze Age was at its core a global scavenger hunt, a desperate and ingenious search for tin that forced humanity to stitch together a world. From the misty shores of Cornwall to the high passes of the Hindu Kush, from the amber forests of the Baltic to the sun-baked docks of the Nile, every trade route, every diplomatic letter, and every ship's manifest was ultimately in service to this one material. It was the vital artery, and the entire body of early civilization pulsed with its flow. This network was the first of its kind, a complex web where the fate of a king in Greece depended on the stability of a mountain trail in Anatolia and the safe passage of a ship off Cyprus. It wove together commerce, statecraft, and shared innovation into a single, fragile tapestry. The rise of this interconnected world brought an unprecedented flowering of art, technology, and wealth, a golden age built on long-distance trust and specialized knowledge. Yet its catastrophic collapse stands as a timeless lesson in fragility. The very interdependence that created such prosperity also sowed the seeds of its undoing, proving that a system optimized for efficiency under stable conditions can unravel with shocking speed when multiple shocks converge. The story of bronze, therefore, is a mirror held up to our own time. We no longer rely on donkeys carrying tin ingots, but our modern world is equally defined by its own desperate searches for rare earth minerals, for semiconductors, for energy. We have built a new global web, infinitely more complex, yet perhaps just as vulnerable to the tremors of climate, conflict, and disruption. So as we look back at those ancient merchants sailing into the unknown, we might ask ourselves, what is the tin of our age? And what unseen networks, humming quietly beneath the surface of our daily lives, sustain the very foundations of our world?